Hi, my name is Nahid Kazaza, and I'd like to welcome you to the Career Exploration Series. Today I have Susan Medwied with me. Susan, we've known each other how long?
Probably 10 years.
10 or 15 years almost. I think probably
Could be.
more than that. Susan has spent the last 40 years in the field of law. And what we're going to do today is take you on her journey with her. So
Great.
I guess I'd like to start with how you even thought, how did you make your decision? Because we have all these students who are asked in high school even, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And they don't know. There's no way to know what you might enjoy doing. How and when did you make your decision to go into law?
To back up a little bit, I always felt sorry for those people who knew what they wanted. I mean, how do you know when you're that young? So I think it should be a combination of skills, what are your strengths, and what's your passion. And some way to make a living would always be a good thing. That's for the parents in the audience. For me, I came from a working class family. My parents were immigrants. The good thing about it was we had no money, they had no expectations, and there were no limits. They came from Eastern Europe. All they knew was here, this kid can be anything she wants. But actually, when I went to college, I was a math major. Only because I had no idea what I wanted to be, but all I knew was that was my best subject.
So that's a good thing for people to know, that you could still become a lawyer if you're a math major. So you don't necessarily have to know what you want to major in when you go to college.
Absolutely true.
Okay, so good to know.
So you can do anything, you can change, which I did. I switched to sociology.
And so what made you
switched to
decide to switch to sociology from math? I mean, so here you are, you're a math major, you're in college, and you chose that just because you were good at it. And so then what happened in your decision making that made you decide to change that?
It was frankly the limitations at the time.
Okay.
I was told as a girl, one of 3 in the math program, that I was going to be a math teacher. I had no interest in being a teacher. Then I was told that that was it. That was my only option. Probably if I had been a male at the time, I would have been exposed to things like, well, how about physics? How about industrial design? How about anything else that uses math skills? But I really felt like a door had slammed shut. I had good verbal skills. I was taking a sociology and a psychology class. I was not interested at all in psychology, but I loved sociology. And I had good verbal as well as math skills. I learned that because I was really passionate about debate. And that started in middle school. So the fact that math door closed meant I started thinking about what else I was good at, what else I would enjoy doing.
Okay.
And public speaking, which you know me very well, I happen to be introverted by nature, but public speaking is something I enjoy. I like the research aspect of it. I like talking to people. And so it was a great match, and it's been a wonderful match over 40 years.
That's awesome. So you started in math, then the door slammed shut. So that's another thing to keep in mind. When one door slams shut, sometimes that can actually be a good thing because it helps you think in a different way, and then it opens up new opportunities just because you have to be creative in thinking what other options are out there. So in your case, you said, well, I don't like psychology, but I do like sociology and I have good verbal skills, so I'll now switch my major to sociology. So you've switched your major to sociology. Again, in your thinking process, when did the door to law open up, or when did the beginning thoughts of doing that open up?
I was blessed with a wonderful mentor, I would call her. She was a professor that I had. I was taking a grad class. I was still an undergrad. I was taking a grad class in cultural anthropology. And she sat me down and said, look, honey, because they could call you that then, you don't want to teach. You don't want to be a social worker. You should go to law school. And it triggered a memory that I forgot to bring up, which is in my last year of high school, my debate coach said, you would be a good lawyer. And so like a good girl, I went to my guidance counselor and said, I want to be a lawyer. And he said, this was 1969, girls don't go to law school. So when that came up again at the end of my college career, it triggered that memory, and I thought, I can do this. This sounds, I knew no lawyers. I really had no idea what they did, but it sounded interesting to me. It sounded like something that would be intellectually engaging and a way to give back to society, and both of those were important to me.
That's really good. And the other thing I noticed that you said, there's this thing they call positive prophecy, where they ask you to go back and remember when somebody gave you a positive prophecy, which they said you would be good at law, right? So way back in high school or middle school, your debate coach said you would be good at law. And I remember for myself in career coaching, before I even knew what it was, at one of my jobs, someone said, I'm seeing a career coach. You know what? You would be good at that. And I had had several people in my life telling me that I would be good. But these little dots in time, these positive prophecies. So you had a few positive prophecies, and then when a door opened up, you suddenly remembered them, and the chain started coming. So you decided, okay, I'll try law. And that's how the whole thing started.
That was really it. As I mentioned, there was no money. So I was out for a year working full-time, and I've been working full-time since I was 16. But working full-time also helped me realize I was working in the hospital industry, and I thought, I do not want to stay here and in 30 years graduate to the head of Central Supply. So I was really interested in going to law school and getting out of that.
Oh, good. So that's another
to know
thing.
What you don't like.
Right. So a lot of times these situations you're in that feel like traps will open doors again, because you have to be creative and say, I don't want this, so I need to go to this. Okay, great. Well, really, that's a great story on your decision to go into law. Let's take a quick break, and then we're going to ask you the next question.
All right.
Hi, we're back talking with Susan Medwied about the career of law. And we just got through talking about how Susan decided to get into law. Now we're going to talk about, well, what is this field? What is it all about? And so I want you to think about someone who has no idea what being an attorney is. Can you give us some sense of, what's the work like? What do you do? What's a typical day like? What would a person do? And I know you had said when we were on break that there are many different versions of that. Maybe you can start with kind of the basics that any attorney would do, and then tell us a little bit about the different types of attorneys and how it might be different.
Well, I think you need the core skills. So the core skills are, although most lawyers are passionate about reading, not all are, but you have to be able to read in depth. You have to be able to analyze fact situations. You have to be able to write, although obviously some lawyers write better than others. You have to be able to verbally communicate, and I think most important, you have to be able to listen. When you're in court, for example, you better be listening to that judge or watching that jury so that you know how to craft your argument in a way that's compelling. When you're talking to a client, you have to listen not just to what they say, but what their nonverbal language is so that you can elicit their goals. Because sometimes, especially high school kids will say, well, my mom says I should be a lawyer because I argue all the time. And it's not about arguing, it is about advocacy. It is about understanding your client's goal and taking your position to help them get there. So on a day-to-day basis, there's a lot of time on the computer. There's a lot of time writing and responding, these days to emails more than letters. There's a lot of listening to people on the phone. We still have phone and in-person conferences. It's not just emails or texts, but it's deep conversations. If what you want is a quick answer, law is probably not for you. It's more complex than that. On the other hand, if you can't ever get to an answer, if you just are pondering, perhaps philosophy would be better for you, because there has to be a concrete aspect to law as well.
Okay, so what kinds of things would you be reading, for example? Would it be contracts or books or laws? Or, I mean, what kinds of things would an attorney be spending their time reading and analyzing?
During law school, certainly what we read is case law. And
Okay.
so we read case upon case upon case, which give you fact situations, and here's the law and here's how to apply it.
Okay.
On a practical level, once you're an attorney, you have to determine what's the law, what are the cases interpreting the law, not just the U.S. Supreme Court, but the cases all along, what judge you're going to be in front of, and who the opposing party is and who their attorney is, in a way to, again, craft your argument in a compelling way. And more than that, because it's not about just squashing the other side, because there almost always is another side. It's also about figuring out what they want and how to get it to them without compromising your position.
Very interesting. So you talked about listening and how that's such an important skill, and then there's this balance, there's a spectrum you're talking about. So you can't be one of those people that's just cut to the chase. I just want, 3 bullets and then I'm off. So you have to be able to listen and really try to figure out what the client wants, but at the same time, if you're going to listen and kind of get carried away on different tangents, then you're going to be over here and you're just going to get lost in the woods with your client. So there's a way of listening for specific things to get to a specific piece of information.
Yes, but there's also two aspects of it. The law is not just a piece of paper and rules. The law impacts people's lives, whether it's their freedom in criminal law, their very personal aspect in a personal injury or family law case, their business in a contract or a patent case. And so on the one hand, you have to listen to the client because they have to be able to vent. On the other hand, after you allow them and they have to feel heard. After they feel heard, then you have to kind of take them down the path as to what facts are relevant and which are not.
Ah, okay.
So you have to understand, here's the law, here's the argument we need to make, and this is where you have to fit in or you don't fit in, and I get to give you bad news.
Now that must not be fun. So you also probably have to be good at giving people bad news. How often do you have to do that?
A fair amount of time. A fair amount of time.
And how do you handle that?
I think it's more that you have to be compassionate towards people, but you also have to tell them that the law is no better than real life, and so it reflects real life. Whether it's this contract that you wrote, and even though you felt pushed to sign it, there was no gun at your head, and so you signed it, you're stuck with it. So you have to explain to people that there's some things you can't get them out of. Some things that they've done that they're stuck with without them feeling stupid or without them losing hope.
Oh gosh, so yeah, verbal skills.
And you have to be comfortable with conflict. Because you're going to have conflict sometimes with your clients, but more typically with the opposing party or opposing counsel.
So can you give me an example of that off the top of your head, or?
There are times that it gets so bad that opposing counsel will call and scream at you, sometimes for lengthy periods of time. And you have to sometimes say, as I have once, you know, let me guess that your client is in the room with you, so I'm going to hang up, you can keep talking, and when your client is gone and we can have a reasonable discussion, you can call me back.
Oh my goodness.
Occasionally, clients are in a high-stress situation, and so the way I describe it to my staff is, I can tolerate it if a client is unhappy or frustrated and wants to call and scream at me. But if you scream at my staff, you're history, because they don't have to tolerate that. But I do, and you become a little tougher about it.
And is there a process that you went through to sort of toughen up?
I think I've always been somewhat emotional, but that's also been balanced by having firm boundaries. And I think, like in every career, you have to have firm boundaries, because at least half the time, sometimes closer to 75%, when someone is screaming at you or very unhappy with a situation, it has absolutely nothing to do with you and everything to do with them or their situation or something they have to tell their business partner or their spouse. And so you can't take it personally.
Yep, really wise advice. So let's talk back on your journey, because you talked a little bit about how there's so many different types of law. Can you maybe help us differentiate? I mean, I would imagine that someone wouldn't have to make a decision about what type of law to go into right away. They would just maybe go into law school, but then when would they have to start distinguishing between the different types, and how would they know maybe what might be more suited to them?
I think, like much of life, what's really important is figuring out who you are, what your strengths are, what your comfort level is. So when I described before, there are certainly people who really love trial work, and that's a different type of skill than people who really love transactional work, which is people who never go to trial, but they delve deeply into documents before or afterwards. And there are people who just don't like other people, but they really love intellectual arguments, and they tend to go into appellate work where they don't have to interact with clients much at all.
That's interesting. I think our traditional view of a lawyer is that they would have to go to trial, but now you're saying that there are these other two options. One is transactional work. Can you tell me what transactional work is a little more specifically?
Typically things like contracts, agreements, licensing. Remember, I'm a business lawyer, so I focus on that. But there's transactional aspects in everything that we do. In an insurance policy that's going to guide whether or not you get a defense on this case. in the settlement agreement that's going to be crafted at the end of your divorce or your personal injury claim, in how you submit your patent application. So the other aspect of it is, what's your background? It's rare for someone in human services or with a philosophy or art degree to go into patent law. Most people in patent law have a biotech or a chemistry or an engineering background.
Okay.
But as to everything else, unlike medical school where you need biology and PChem and all that kind of stuff, for law school you could really be any major. There tend to be some themes, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Right, okay, so if you had your undergrad in chemistry or biology, then you might kind of naturally lean towards, as you said, patent work.
Or not, or you might be interested in transactional or litigation work that involved things like large biotech firms or hospitals, because those are not only the skill set that you have, or perhaps a language that you're familiar with, it's something that you have a passion for.
That's so interesting, because now I'm starting to think of other attorneys I know, and you know how I have one that just sort of lit up at the idea of advocating for women in companies, and she's in employment law. And then I have another one that I know, the one that was on our success team, and how she wanted to do, she was doing what, adoption?
Right.
Right? So an adoption attorney. So now I'm beginning to realize, oh my goodness, so you could be an attorney, but yet you could apply it in so many different places.
Well, there was something else that you brought up that triggered a thought in me, which is it's also important to know through law school and through your early career what you really don't like. Like much of life, it's easier for most people to figure out what they don't like than what they do like.
Right, and so again, those slammed doors kind of guide you, and you're like, ugh, I don't like doing this.
Right.
But it sounds like there's so many different options in law that even if there's a whole bunch of things you don't like about it, you usually can find something that you like, plenty that you like. Okay, maybe one more question about your journey. You said that you had an interesting story about how you thought you really liked criminal law, I think.
Right.
Can you tell us that?
Sure. Again, when I started law school, I had no idea what type of lawyer I wanted to be, but I loved the thought of doing criminal work. And so I took every criminal law class, every criminal evidence class, every criminal advocacy class, and I just really enjoyed them until the summer between second and third year of law school. I clerked at the Federal Public Defender's Office, and I realized I don't like this at all. I just don't find it intellectually challenging at all. I find much of the trial work in criminal law is kind of shooting from the hip. This is just not who I am. So again, it's that gasp of, now what? And so I had to sit down and think, well, what are the classes that I excelled at? And I was horrified to see what they were, because I had no background in it and no thought of going into them. But they tended to be the business and the commercial code and wills and estates. And I thought, are you kidding me? So you have to reassess, well, wait a minute, what did I like about them? What was I good at? And try that path. Now, if you are blessed with an opportunity, for example, out of law school and being in a very large firm, the better firms will allow you to rotate between a variety of areas, so that you can figure that out.
That's great. Okay. We've been talking about going into law from college, but there have been some clients of mine, and I know there's quite a few people out there who, you know, they might have been doing something else with their life. They never figured out what they wanted to do. Suddenly they're in their 20s, they've already graduated from college, and it's been several years, and now they're thinking, well, I've lost my chance. I think I'd love to go into law, but you know, I never went into it back then. Is it possible to transition into law as a second career, and if so, how would you do that?
Absolutely. There is a split or a fork in the road. For people who have a bachelor's degree, you don't need any particular major, and you can certainly transition into law. For people who need to work, there are typically schools that meet during the day, full-time schools, about 3 years. There are night schools as well. I know the school I went to had both a day and a night program. That's very common. The night program is about 4 years.
Okay, so I could be working and
Absolutely.
I could already have gotten my graduate degree. I could be in my 30s and I could say, you know what? I think I love law. I want to go to law school, and I could have my full-time job and go to law school at night for 4 years. Or I could, if I had a really flexible job, I could maybe do some day classes and get it done quicker. Or 4 years is
You
probably,
really have to choose between a full-time student and a part-time student in most schools, but remember, I went to law school a long time ago.
okay, so, but if I was a full-time student, it would probably take 2 years.
3 years.
3 years, okay, and if I'm part-time,
Right.
night school, more like 4 years.
But here's an example of a transition. My best friend in law school, who I'm still friends with, was a dance major in college,
Okay,
was putting her husband through graduate school, was working in a law office as a legal secretary, and thought, I could do this. And went back
okay,
to
so
school.
that's how she got it, and then she went back to school,
Right.
and she's been an attorney for how long?
Oh, about the same, we graduated in '76.
Okay, okay,
But
great. So
actually,
it's
she
awesome.
hates it.
Now she
And
hates it.
so she segued into something else.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so, you can have many careers. I myself have had many careers, and so for those of you who are thinking of transitioning to law, that is definitely an option. You do have to go back to school, but you can do it part-time, so that's really a good thing to know. Susan, what haven't we talked about? Any kind of advice that you would give someone who either wants to transition into law or wants to consider it as a career? Anything you can think of?
There are obviously a lot of people in the news who have a legal background. So there are a number of people that go to law school never with a desire of practicing law, but of doing something else.
Oh, that's good to know.
There are a number of MDs, doctors, who go back because they want the quote legal knowledge to apply to their work. There are some engineers that go back because they want to be patent attorneys or patent prosecutors. Prosecutor is someone who handles patent applications. There are a number of people who choose to go to law school instead of or in conjunction with an MBA because they want to be in business. There
Okay.
are people who want to be in banking, who want something in addition to a bachelor's degree, but again, usually short of an MBA, and they want that legal knowledge.
So you could theoretically go into law school and not even become an attorney,
Right.
but use that legal knowledge in other areas such as business.
Absolutely.
Good to know. So let's talk about work fulfillment. I think people sometimes get stuck when they're looking for a career because they're asking the question, what will fulfill me, and they don't really know. So now that you've been doing this career for a while and we know that it's a good fit for you, how do you find fulfillment in your work?
It's an interesting question because it reminds me not just of career, but of life. When people say, oh, I've fallen out of love with my husband or wife or my partner, that's really a stupid question. So if you'll forgive my saying so, all of us who love what we do, and I am truly passionate about the work, about my clients, that doesn't mean you're going to love it all the time. There are things that you do that are drudgery. There are things that you do that are boring. That's life. They're just things that have to get done. So you have to look at the core skills. I also think when people say, I want to be passionate about my work, that they really don't want to make a decision. They
Yeah.
don't want to jump right in. They just want to stall. And life will pass you by if that's the attitude you take. So you have to try different things. And there are going to be pieces of it you love, and pieces of it that you love less, or even hate. But sometimes you have to look at those pieces you hate and say, isn't that just the drudgery of life? Isn't that just what we have to tolerate and move past? It's not that I hate this job. I hate this about working. But we all have to do this.
Right, okay.
Maybe you hate certain paperwork. Maybe you hate paying bills. Maybe you hate making phone calls to strangers. So what? You have to do it anyway.
Yeah, and you probably can get some good out of it.
And you
So-
get better at it.
Yes.
And maybe you hate it less.
Right? Yep. I remember I had a dance teacher once that told me that when I was complaining about a step, usually the people that complain about a certain dance step, it's because they don't do it very well.
Right.
So I would imagine as you do things better, you hate them less. What about, kind of a good day? So when you kind of drive home at night and you reflect back, that was a good day, sort of what makes it a good day for you?
That's an excellent question because I think we are all different. For me, I love completion. Some people love process. I love completion. So I feel great about a day if I actually completed 2, 3, 4 things rather than moved 10 things along. That just is not as satisfying for me. But I think people differ.
Yeah. So, you've talked several times in our interview about knowing yourself and how important that is. How did you discover yourself? Or, maybe what are some, how do you,
I think I've been blessed with always being self-assured. I was always comfortable not running with the crowd. This is who I am, this is what I like, this is what you like. This is who I am, this is who you are. I realize not everyone's like that.
So
But
knowing what you like, really.
I think that's actually one of the blessings of being introverted. I think for a lot of people who are extroverted, my son is very extroverted, they're way too concerned with how they're seen, how they're perceived, what other people think of them, what other people think they should do. You have to listen to yourself. That's part of growing up.
Yeah, and you listen to yourself by really kind of noticing what you like
Exactly.
and what you don't like.
Right.
And I know that you were just asking my daughter, when does time stop for you?
Right.
I think that's another excellent question. Great. So I think, maybe one last question, if you could give any advice to anyone who's feeling a little bit lost in life and feeling like, I don't really know what I want to do next. What haven't we talked about that?
Never fear change. Really embrace change. If something isn't working, it's unlikely that your life is over. More likely you'll have other options available to you. But the know yourself or piece really comes first. If you don't know who you are, what you like, you have to pay attention to yourself. And frankly, if you don't, no one else will.
And on that note, I'd like to thank you so much for being with us today. It's been such a great time having you here, and I know that our viewers are going to so appreciate the gift that you've given us of your wisdom.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Nahid.
All right.